"It hurts, but don't stop," she moaned. The cowboy smiled. "You're stronger than you know." The small town had grown quiet over the years. Dusty roads stretched between old wooden buildings, and the wide sky seemed larger than anywhere else. Most people knew each other, and strangers were rare. That was why many eyes turned when a tired pickup truck stopped near the edge of the only working ranch, still holding on against time. The woman stepped out slowly, closing the door gently, as if even the sound might break her focus. She carried a small bag, nothing more. Her boots were worn but clean, and her expression showed determination mixed with exhaustion. She paused for a moment, looking across the land. Fences leaned at angles, grass grew unevenly, and the barn looked like it had survived more storms than it should have. Still, there was something strong about the place, something honest. She had seen the job listing weeks earlier. It had been simple: ranch help needed, hard work, honest pay. Many people ignored ads like that, but she didn't. She needed a fresh start, somewhere far from noise and memories that followed too closely. The cowboy who owned the ranch noticed her arrival from across the yard. He wiped his hands on a cloth and walked toward her with steady steps. He was not young, but he moved with the strength of someone used to long days. His face showed lines shaped by sun and years of responsibility. He didn't speak immediately, only nodded in greeting. "You came a long way?" he asked finally. She nodded back. "Far enough." There was no need for long introductions. He showed her where she could leave her bag, where the tools were kept, and which parts of the fence needed urgent repair. His voice stayed calm and clear, without judgment or curiosity. She appreciated that. Too many people asked questions she didn't want to answer. The first hours passed quietly. She followed instructions carefully, learning by watching rather than talking. The work was harder than she expected, but she refused to slow down. Each movement carried purpose. Each task felt like proof that she belonged somewhere again. The cowboy observed without interfering. He noticed how she checked knots twice, how she spoke gently to the horses, and how she avoided resting even when the sun grew harsh. There was a stubborn energy about her, the kind that could either build something strong or push someone too far. Around midday, he handed her a water bottle. She accepted it with a quick thank you and drank without stopping her work for long. He watched her carefully but said nothing. By afternoon, they worked side by side repairing a broken fence line. The wood was heavy and the ground was uneven. She lifted more than she should have, but when the cowboy offered to take over, she shook her head. "I've got it," she said, her voice firm. "Be brave." Time passed slowly under the heat. Sweat gathered on her forehead, and her breathing grew heavier, but she refused to complain. At one point, she paused, pressing a hand against her side as if steadying herself. "It hurts, but don't stop," she murmured quietly, almost to herself, before continuing the work. The cowboy heard her. He didn't interrupt, but the words stayed in his mind. They sounded less like encouragement and more like a rule she lived by. When evening approached, the sky turned soft orange. They finished the last section of fence just as the light began to fade. She stepped back, looking at the work with quiet satisfaction. It wasn't perfect, but it stood strong. "You learn fast," he said simply. She shrugged. "I just keep going." They walked back toward the barn together. The air felt cooler, and a gentle breeze carried the smell of dry grass. She noticed how peaceful the land felt compared to where she had come from. No loud traffic, no constant pressure, just open space and the sound of wind. Inside the barn, she helped feed the horses. One of them nudged her gently, and she smiled for the first time since arriving. The cowboy noticed the change and realized she looked different when she forgot to guard herself. "You've worked with animals before," he said. "A little," she replied.
"They're easier than people." He didn't argue with that. As days turned into routine, she adapted quickly.
She woke before sunrise, already dressed for work when he arrived outside. She learned the names of the horses, fixed tools without being asked, and never avoided difficult tasks. The town began to notice her presence. A few locals drove by slowly, curious about the newcomer. Some waved politely, while others simply stared. She ignored them, focusing only on the ranch. One morning, while moving supplies, she stumbled slightly but caught herself before falling. The cowboy stepped closer. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she answered quickly, too quickly. He hesitated but didn't push. Trust, he knew, couldn't be forced. Later that day, clouds gathered unexpectedly, bringing strong wind. They rushed to secure equipment before the storm arrived. Rain began suddenly, heavy and cold, soaking the ground within minutes. She kept working despite the slippery conditions, her movements determined. "Take it slower," he called out. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice strained. They managed to finish just before the worst of the storm hit. Inside the barn they stood catching their breath, rain pounding against the roof. She leaned against a wall, eyes closed briefly as if gathering strength. "You don't have to prove anything here," he said gently. She opened her eyes and looked at him, surprised by the words. For a moment something vulnerable appeared in her expression, but it disappeared quickly. "I know," she said softly, though it sounded like she wasn't fully convinced. The storm passed by evening, leaving the land refreshed. Water dripped from fences, and the air smelled clean. She walked outside alone, watching the sky clear. The quiet allowed her thoughts to settle. She didn't expect kindness when she arrived. She didn't expect patience either, yet the cowboy never raised his voice or treated her like she was fragile. He let her work, but he also watched carefully, ready to step in if needed. That balance confused her. She had learned to expect either control or indifference from others, not steady respect. The next morning they began repairing another section of land damaged by years of neglect. The work required teamwork, and slowly they developed a rhythm, passing tools without asking, understanding each other's movements without many words. During a short break he finally asked, "What made you choose this place?" She stared toward the horizon for a long moment. Before answering, "I needed somewhere quiet." He nodded, accepting the simple explanation even though it clearly hid deeper reasons. As the sun climbed higher, she felt the familiar ache returning, but she ignored it. Work gave her purpose. Work kept her moving forward. From the outside, it looked like a simple partnership between employer and worker. But beneath the routine, something else formed. A quiet understanding between two people who carried invisible burdens. Neither spoke about it yet. Neither rushed anything. Still, the ranch felt different with her there. The animals seemed calmer. The days felt less heavy. One evening as they finished feeding the horses, she looked around and said softly, "This place deserves to stand." He glanced at her, surprised by the emotion in her voice. "Maybe it will," he replied. She nodded, determination returning to her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was not just escaping something, she was building something new. The morning sun rose slowly, painting the sky with soft colors of orange and pink. The ranch looked different in the light of a new day. Everything seemed calmer, and even the animals appeared more relaxed. The woman had already been up for some time, her boots hitting the wooden floor lightly as she prepared for another long day. She didn't rush, but there was a quiet focus in her movements that showed she had a clear purpose. The cowboy appeared soon after, carrying a small bucket of feed. He greeted her with a simple nod, and she returned it without a word. Words were not always needed between them. Over the past few days, a rhythm had formed. She learned his pace, and he learned hers. Together, they moved around the ranch, tending to chores, repairing fences, and feeding animals. Today, however, the work felt heavier. Some of the old posts had rotted more than they realized, and the boards they were using for repairs were heavy and unwieldy. She lifted them carefully but continuously, never asking for help. The cowboy noticed her strength, but also saw her shoulders tense slightly with each movement. He admired her determination, but also worried silently. During a short break, they sat on a fallen log, catching their breath. She wiped sweat from her forehead and took a sip of water, her eyes scanning the open fields. The wind carried the scent of grass and earth, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax, letting the weight of her past fade into the background.
"You handle the horses well,"
the cowboy said, breaking the quiet. They seem to like you. She smiled faintly.
They don't judge, she said simply. He chuckled softly.
There was truth in that statement. Animals responded to honesty, patience, and care. People often did not. Over time, he realized that her strength came not just from physical effort, but from understanding life's hardships without complaining. She had learned to survive in a world that had not been kind, and yet here she was, choosing to build rather than hide. After the break, they returned to the fence line. Clouds gathered slowly, hinting at the possibility of rain, but neither slowed down. They worked together seamlessly, passing tools and boards without unnecessary words. The woman's movements were precise, careful, and strong. Every step seemed intentional, as though she was proving something to herself more than anyone else. At one point, a stubborn horse resisted being led back to its stable. The woman approached slowly, her hand extended gently. The animal stepped back, wary, but she didn't rush. She waited patiently, speaking softly, allowing the horse to feel safe. After a few tense minutes, the horse finally allowed her to guide it. The cowboy watched silently, impressed. Her care was never forced. It came naturally, like an understanding that only experience could teach. The afternoon brought heat and fatigue, but the woman pushed forward. She lifted boards, hammered posts, and tied knots with steady hands. Her breathing grew heavier, but she refused to rest more than a moment at a time. The cowboy noticed this, his mind turning over her earlier words. It hurts, but don't stop. He understood then that her strength was tied to more than endurance. It was tied to a history of proving herself in situations where no one else had believed in her. When the first drops of rain fell, they were caught off guard. The sky darkened quickly and the wind picked up, whipping dust and loose boards across the yard. She didn't hesitate. She continued moving, securing materials and tying knots tightly despite the wet wood and slippery ground. "You should slow down," the cowboy called over the gusts. "I'm fine," she shouted back, though the strain in her voice betrayed her words. He stepped closer, grabbing a board to assist her, but she gently shook her head. "I've got this," she said, her voice firm. There was no anger in her tone, only a quiet insistence that she would not stop, even if it hurt. Finally, the rain eased, leaving behind a fresh, clean scent that filled the air. They both paused to catch their breath, watching as droplets glistened on the grass and fences. She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and quiet pride. "You push yourself too hard," the cowboy said, more softly this time. "I've had to," she replied simply. "It's how I learned to keep going." He didn't press further, understanding that her perseverance was not something to argue against. It was part of who she was. Over the next few days, the routine continued. She woke early, worked tirelessly, and showed the same quiet strength in every task. The cowboy began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor. While she was still careful not to speak of her past, there were moments when she allowed herself to laugh lightly or pause and admire the ranch. Those small moments were significant, showing that she was slowly letting herself feel at home. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by, curious about the newcomer. She greeted him politely, but remained focused on her work. The cowboy noticed her resilience in handling conversation without distraction. It was clear that she had learned to maintain her focus, no matter the interruptions around her. Later, while leading the horses to the pasture, she stumbled slightly over uneven ground. The cowboy reached out instinctively, but she caught herself. "I'm okay," she said, brushing off concern. He studied her for a moment, realizing that her independence was both admirable and concerning. She would not ask for help, even when she needed it. That evening, as they fed the animals and repaired smaller tasks, the sun began to dip behind the hills. The sky glowed softly with warm colors, reflecting in the calm eyes of the horses. She paused for a moment, taking in the scene. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the peace of the ranch, separate from the weight of her past. "You've changed this place already," the cowboy said quietly, noticing the calm she brought to the ranch.
She looked at him surprised.
"I've only just arrived," she replied. "Sometimes it's the beginning that matters most," he said. They shared a moment of quiet understanding, the kind that did not need explanation. Both had faced challenges, both carried their own burdens, and both were slowly learning that life could be lighter with trust. Over the following days, the bond between them grew stronger. She continued to push herself physically, but the cowboy noticed subtle signs of self-care beginning to appear. She rested longer when needed, smiled more easily, and even allowed him to guide some tasks when the work became heavy. Trust, it seemed, was forming quietly alongside the fences and barns they were repairing. One afternoon, as the sun began to fade, she approached him with a stubborn horse that refused to be led. Calmly, she spoke to it softly, moving slowly and deliberately. The cowboy watched as the horse finally responded, stepping in line without force. Her patience, strength, and quiet confidence were evident. He realized that she had endured hardships that had taught her the importance of perseverance without needing approval from anyone. By the end of the week, the ranch felt different. Fences were repaired, animals were healthier, and the work was steady and purposeful. She moved through each task with quiet focus, her presence making the ranch feel alive again. The cowboy, too, felt a change. He had grown to trust her judgment and admired her resilience. That evening, as they watched the sun set behind the hills, she spoke softly. "This place deserves to be strong." He nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. It was not just about the land, the horses, or the fences. It was about rebuilding lives that had been tested and learning to trust again. The first days had been hard. She had faced her own limits, the challenges of the ranch, and the judgment of strangers. Yet, through it all, she had proven her strength not with words, but with steady actions. The cowboy saw it clearly now. She was strong not because she avoided pain, but because she continued despite it. As the night settled over the ranch, a calm quiet spread across the fields. The stars appeared one by one, and the cool air carried the scent of earth and grass. She felt a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years, and the cowboy realized that the ranch was no longer just a place of work. It had become a place where two people, both carrying invisible burdens, could slowly begin to heal. The work would continue tomorrow, and the day after, and the days after that. Each moment, each task, and each quiet understanding built something stronger than fences or barns. It built trust, respect, and a shared journey toward resilience. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel hope, and the cowboy, watching quietly, realized that strength could be quiet, patient, and gentle, yet powerful enough to change everything. The days at the ranch continued with their quiet rhythm, yet a sense of tension lingered beneath the routine. The woman had settled into her work, moving through tasks with careful efficiency. She lifted, tied, and guided with steady hands, each motion a testament to her growing skill. The cowboy noticed how she seemed to take on more than she should, how she ignored the ache in her arms and the strain in her legs. He admired her determination but also worried that she might push herself too far. One morning the sun rose slowly over the hills, casting soft light across the pastures. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of dew and earth. The woman was already outside, inspecting the fence line for any damage from the previous night's storm. Boards were warped and posts loosened, but she didn't hesitate. She picked up a hammer and began working, her focus unwavering. The cowboy arrived shortly after, carrying a bundle of new posts. He handed them to her, and she accepted them without a word. There was a quiet understanding between them now. They didn't need to explain themselves. Each knew the other's pace. Each knew when to step in and when to hold back. As they worked, a neighbor drove by, slowing to watch the scene. He waved, and she nodded politely, continuing her task. The cowboy noticed this small interaction and thought about how much trust she had already built, not just with him, but with the community, even though most people still viewed newcomers with caution. Hours passed under the rising sun. The woman's hands moved quickly, tying knots and lifting boards with practiced ease. Yet the strain began to show. Her breathing grew heavier, and a small wince crossed her face when she adjusted a stubborn post. The cowboy observed quietly, stepping closer. "You've been working hard," he said. I'm fine, she replied, brushing it off. She didn't want him to worry. He didn't press, but his eyes followed her movements closely. He remembered the first days, how she had pushed herself without complaint, how her mantra, "It hurts, but don't stop," had seemed to drive her forward. He realized that her strength was not just in her hands or her arms, but in her spirit, shaped by a past of hardship and perseverance. The morning shifted into afternoon, and clouds gathered on the horizon. The wind picked up, rustling the grass and whispering through the fences. She worked steadily, refusing to let the weather slow her down. The cowboy watched as she lifted a particularly heavy board, her muscles straining, her expression determined. "You should take a break," he called. "I will soon," she replied, her voice firm. She paused only briefly, then continued her work. It wasn't just physical strength that defined her. The cowboy realized that her determination came from a place deeper than the body, an inner resolve built from years of facing challenges alone. She had learned to rely on herself, to push forward even when the odds seemed against her. Later that day, the clouds released a sudden downpour. Rain pelted the ground, turning dust into mud. The work became slippery and difficult, but she didn't hesitate. She secured the boards, tied the knots, and guided the horses to shelter. Her focus never wavered, even as the wind whipped around them. "You're pushing too hard," the cowboy said, stepping closer. "I can handle it," she replied, though her voice revealed strain. He offered his hand, a simple gesture of support, but she shook her head. "I've got it," she said. She didn't want to rely on anyone, not even him. Her past had taught her that strength came from independence, from proving that she could endure. By evening, the storm had passed, leaving behind a fresh, clean scent in the air. The fields glistened with moisture, and the fences stood firm. She stepped back, wiping rain from her face, and smiled faintly. There was satisfaction in the work completed, in the proof that she could handle the challenges before her. The cowboy approached, carrying a bucket of feed for the horses. "You've done well today," he said simply. "I had to," she replied, her voice quiet. It wasn't pride she felt. It was relief. Relief that she had made it through another day, that she had proven to herself once again that she was capable. Over the next few days, a challenge arose that tested both of them. A neighboring rancher approached, attempting to purchase part of the land at a low price. The cowboy refused, determined to keep his property. The woman worked harder than ever, helping repair fences and secure the land, understanding that the ranch's future depended on their joint effort. One afternoon, while moving a particularly heavy post, she felt a sharp twinge in her back from an old injury. She paused, pressing her hands to her sides, but refused to stop. The cowboy noticed immediately. "You should rest," he urged. "I can manage," she said, though the pain was evident. He stepped closer, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. Strength isn't just doing everything alone. Sometimes it's knowing when to accept help. She looked at him, surprised. No one had ever said those words to her. She had been taught that asking for help was weakness. Yet, in his calm voice, there was respect and understanding. Slowly she allowed herself to accept it. That evening, after the day's work was done, they sat together outside the barn, watching the sunset. The sky was painted with colors of pink, orange, and gold, reflecting off the wet ground. She finally spoke about a piece of her past, a time when she had been underestimated, dismissed, and left to handle everything alone. He listened without interruption, understanding that her experiences had shaped her into the person he saw now, strong, capable, and determined, but also cautious about trusting others. "You've carried a lot on your own," he said softly. "I had to," she replied. "There wasn't anyone else." He nodded, knowing that her resilience had come from necessity, but also recognizing that she didn't need to carry everything anymore. The ranch, the work, and their partnership were slowly teaching her that strength could also come from trust. The following days were filled with steady progress. Fences were repaired, animals were cared for, and the ranch began to look healthier than it had in years. She worked tirelessly, yet allowed herself small moments of rest and reflection. The cowboy noticed these moments and realized that she was learning to balance her strength with patience. One afternoon, as they guided a particularly stubborn horse back to the stable, she struggled slightly. The cowboy stepped beside her, offering guidance and steadying her as she moved. Together, they led the horse safely inside. She smiled faintly, grateful for the support but still proud that she had done most of the work herself. Evenings became their quiet time, where they would sit outside the barn watching the sunset and sharing small stories. She rarely spoke of the past in detail, but she allowed herself to laugh lightly and enjoy the calm of the ranch. The cowboy shared tales of his own challenges, teaching her that strength could be gentle and steady, not just about enduring pain. By the end of the week, the woman realized she felt more at home than she had in years. The ranch no longer felt like a place of work alone. It had become a place of growth, trust, and quiet healing. She understood that her perseverance was valuable, but so was the ability to accept guidance and partnership. The cowboy, watching her, recognized that her strength was not just physical. It was emotional, forged through challenges and tempered with patience. She had come to the ranch seeking a fresh start, and she was slowly finding more than she expected: respect, trust, and a sense of belonging. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in deep hues, they stood side by side. The work was far from over, but they had built something stronger than fences or barns. They had built a quiet partnership, rooted in understanding and shared effort. She looked at the fading light, feeling the satisfaction of the day's work and the subtle warmth of connection. For the first time in a long while, she felt that she was not only surviving, but also growing. The ranch had become a place of possibilities where resilience met care, and where two people could face challenges together without losing their own strength. The evening brought a cool breeze and the stars began to appear in the sky. The woman breathed deeply, feeling the calm that had been missing for so long. She glanced at the cowboy, seeing a quiet smile of acknowledgement. They had faced another day, learned from it, and grown stronger together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she felt ready. For the first time, she realized that strength was not just about pushing through pain. It was about perseverance, trust, and knowing that one did not have to face everything alone. The ranch woke to another clear morning, the sun spilling light across the fields and warming the earth. The woman was already outside, tending to the horses. Each animal knew her gentle touch, responding with calmness as she fed and groomed them. Her movements were precise, practiced, and patient, yet there was a quiet determination in every step. She had learned to care not just with her hands, but with her presence. The cowboy stepped out shortly after, carrying tools for the day's work. He greeted her with a simple nod, a silent acknowledgement of the trust that had grown between them over weeks of shared effort. The work ahead was challenging. A section of fencing along the far edge of the property had been damaged by recent storms and needed urgent repair. Boards were heavy, and some posts had rotted beyond use. Together they moved efficiently, passing supplies and securing boards with steady hands. There was an unspoken rhythm in their cooperation. They didn't need to speak constantly because each knew the other's pace, strength, and intent. As they worked, the woman noticed small improvements in herself. She moved more fluidly, lifting boards without straining as much, guiding the horses with a confidence she hadn't felt when she first arrived. The cowboy observed her quietly, impressed not only by her skill, but by her resilience. He had seen her face pain without complaint, pushing forward with determination that was born of years of learning to survive on her own. Yet now, he noticed a subtle shift. She was allowing herself to rest when needed, and to accept guidance without frustration. Mid-morning brought a gentle breeze that stirred the tall grass and carried the scent of the earth. The cowboy paused for a moment, watching her tie a stubborn knot with patient hands. "You've come a long way since your first day," he said softly. She looked up, a small smile forming on her face. "It doesn't feel that long," she replied. He shook his head slightly.
"It does. You've adapted, learned, and improved faster than I expected." There was pride in his words, but it was quiet, understated. She felt a warmth in her chest,
not from flattery but from recognition. For someone who had spent much of her life proving her abilities in silence, this acknowledgment felt meaningful. By noon, the sun was high and bright, casting long shadows across the fields. They paused briefly to drink water and rest. She leaned against a fence post, closing her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel the peace of the ranch. For the first time in years, she felt she could breathe fully, without the weight of constant worry pressing down. The cowboy joined her, leaning against the same post. "You work hard every day," he said, watching her. "But strength isn't just in what you can lift or endure. It's also in knowing when to step back and take care of yourself." She nodded slowly, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. She had always believed that pushing through pain was the only measure of strength. Now she saw that resilience also meant balance, knowing when to continue and when to rest, when to act, and when to let someone else help. After their brief pause, they returned to work. The next section of fencing required careful attention. Posts had to be aligned perfectly, boards secured tightly, and knots tied with precision. They moved together seamlessly, passing tools without hesitation, correcting each other gently when needed. The woman realized that she had started to trust his guidance not because she was weak, but because she recognized his experience and judgment. During the afternoon, a stubborn horse wandered near the edge of the field, refusing to follow her instructions. She approached slowly, speaking in a calm voice and moving with deliberate patience. The horse hesitated, then finally followed her lead. The cowboy watched silently, impressed by her ability to handle challenges without force, relying instead on understanding and patience. As the day progressed, the sun began to lower, casting a golden glow over the ranch. The fences were repaired, the animals fed, and the tools stored safely. They paused to admire the work, taking a moment to reflect on their efforts. The woman felt a sense of pride and accomplishment she hadn't experienced in years. The cowboy, too, felt satisfaction, not just from the physical work completed, but from seeing the woman grow, adapt, and embrace her strength in a new way.
Evening brought a cool breeze and the soft sounds of animals settling for the night.
They stood together outside the barn, watching the sunset paint the sky with colors of pink, orange, and gold. The quiet was comforting, a contrast to the noise and chaos that had once filled her life. She felt a sense of belonging she hadn't expected, realizing that the ranch had become more than a place of work. It was a space of growth, trust, and quiet healing. The cowboy spoke quietly, almost to himself. "You've changed this place, and maybe it's changed you too." She looked at him, a faint smile on her lips.
"I think it has," she said softly.
"I've learned more here than I expected." They shared a moment of silence, understanding that their bond had grown through shared effort, patience, and respect. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was steady and meaningful. Both had faced challenges in their own lives, and together they had learned to navigate difficulties with trust and resilience. Over the following days, the woman continued to take initiative, suggesting improvements to the ranch and finding creative solutions for problems. The cowboy welcomed her ideas, appreciating her perspective and determination. Together they worked to restore the ranch to a place of strength and stability. One afternoon, while repairing a particularly difficult section of fence, she winced as a sharp pain traveled through her shoulder. The cowboy noticed immediately and stepped closer. "Take a moment," he said gently. She shook her head, determined to finish. "I'll be fine," she replied. He didn't argue but stayed nearby, ready to assist if needed. She worked carefully, mindful of the pain, yet continued to secure the boards and tie the knots. By the time the task was complete, she was exhausted, but there was a quiet satisfaction in her efforts. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, she stood back, surveying the repaired fence line. It was strong, straight, and secure, a reflection of the care and determination she had put into it. The cowboy joined her, handing her a water bottle. They shared a brief smile, acknowledging the day's accomplishments. That night, as they sat outside the barn under a sky full of stars, the woman reflected on how much had changed since her arrival. She had learned to trust, to accept help, and to recognize her own strength. The ranch had become a place of stability and growth, not just for the land and animals, but for her as well. The cowboy watched her quietly, understanding that strength could take many forms: patience, resilience, compassion, and the ability to trust. Together they had built more than fences and barns. They had built a partnership rooted in respect and mutual understanding. As the stars twinkled above, a sense of calm settled over the ranch. The woman felt a quiet hope, realizing that she was not only surviving but thriving. She had faced challenges, endured pain, and learned to trust again. And in doing so, she had discovered that strength was not just in persistence, but in balance, trust, and connection. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, and new opportunities. But for now, they rested, knowing that they had accomplished something meaningful together. The ranch was thriving, the animals were safe, and both had grown stronger through shared effort and quiet determination. The night was peaceful, filled with the sounds of nature and the soft whispers of the wind. She looked at the cowboy and realized that trust, respect, and shared effort were the foundations of true strength. And as she closed her eyes, a sense of calm filled her heart, knowing that she had found not only a place to work, but a place to grow, heal, and belong. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, casting soft light on the fences, fields, and animals. The woman had been awake for some time, moving quietly through the barn as she prepared for the day. She brushed the horses gently, humming softly under her breath. Her hands moved with care and precision, and her expression was calm but focused. The cowboy stepped outside soon after, carrying a bundle of tools for the day's work. He nodded to her, and she returned the gesture. Words were often unnecessary between them now. They had developed a rhythm built on trust, understanding, and shared effort. Today was important. A section of fence at the far edge of the property had weakened, and a group of neighbors had come to observe. The woman knew that completing this repair would demonstrate not only the strength of the ranch, but also the progress they had made together. She lifted the heavy boards carefully, positioning them while the cowboy steadied the posts. Their movements were synchronized, as if they had worked together for years. As they worked, the woman's thoughts drifted briefly to the past. She remembered how alone she had felt, how every task had once seemed impossible without guidance or support. Now she had found a place where her efforts mattered, where her strength was recognized, and where she could rely on someone without losing her independence. It was a new feeling, unfamiliar, but welcome. The cowboy observed her quietly, noticing the determination in her eyes. He realized that her strength had always been there. It had simply needed the right space to grow. She was no longer fighting against the world alone. Together they had created a safe and productive environment where resilience was nurtured rather than tested to exhaustion. By late morning the fence was nearly complete. The boards were straight, the posts secure, and the animals safe behind the reinforced boundary. The neighbors watched silently, impressed by the efficiency and care with which the work had been done. Some nodded in approval, and a few even offered quiet words of praise. The woman accepted these with a small smile, feeling a sense of pride she had rarely experienced before. During a short break, she leaned against a post, taking in the view of the fields stretching to the horizon. The wind carried the fresh scent of grass and earth, and the sun warmed her face. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply be present, without thinking about past hardships or future worries. The cowboy joined her, carrying a water bottle and handing it to her with a gentle nod. "You've come far," he said softly. "Not just with the ranch, but with yourself." She accepted the water, pausing before speaking. "I feel stronger here," she admitted. "Not just in my body, but in how I can face each day without fear." He smiled faintly, recognizing the truth in her words. Strength, he knew, was more than lifting heavy boards or working long hours. It was about resilience, patience, and the courage to trust others. Together they had built not only a ranch, but also a foundation for growth, healing, and connection. The afternoon brought new challenges. A stubborn horse had wandered near the edge of the pasture, spooked by a sudden noise. The woman approached slowly, speaking in a calm, steady voice. She guided the animal back without force, relying on patience and understanding rather than strength alone. The cowboy watched, impressed by her gentle authority and quiet confidence. She had learned that true power was not always loud or forceful, but often found in care, persistence, and respect. Once the horse was safely returned, they continued with their tasks. The fence was finished, the tools were stored, and the animals were secure. The woman stepped back, surveying their work with a sense of satisfaction. The ranch was stronger, safer, and more organized than it had been in years. More importantly, she felt the progress she had made within herself, the ability to trust, to rely on another, and to recognize her own worth. As the sun began to dip behind the hills, casting a golden glow across the fields, they sat together on a small rise overlooking the ranch. The wind was gentle, carrying the scents of grass, earth, and the soft warmth of late afternoon. For a while they sat in silence, letting the peacefulness of the moment sink in. "You've done more than repair fences," the cowboy said finally. "You've brought life back to this place. You've helped me see that resilience isn't just enduring. It's also building something new." She looked at him, a faint smile forming. "And you've helped me see that I don't have to face everything alone," she replied. "That strength can be shared, and that trusting someone doesn't make you weak." There was a quiet understanding between them, a mutual recognition of how far they had come. Both had faced hardships, both had carried burdens, and both had learned the value of partnership, patience, and mutual respect. The ranch had become a symbol not just of their work, but of their growth, resilience, and the possibilities that came from trust. Evening arrived, bringing a cool breeze and the soft sounds of animals settling for the night. The woman helped guide the horses back into the barn and ensured all equipment was stored safely. The cowboy watched, appreciating how naturally she had become part of the ranch, how her presence had strengthened both the land and its caretaker. Once the chores were done, they sat outside the barn, watching as the sky shifted from golden to deep shades of blue, sprinkled with stars. The calm was comforting, a stark contrast to the uncertainty and struggle that had once defined their lives. The woman reflected on her journey, how she had arrived seeking work, how she had faced challenges alone, and how she had gradually opened herself to trust and partnership.
"You've changed more than the ranch," the cowboy said quietly, breaking the silence.
"You've changed me too. I've learned that strength isn't just about standing alone. It's about knowing when to lean on someone else." She nodded, feeling the truth in his words. "And I've learned that trusting doesn't make me weak. It allows me to grow, to build something stronger than I could on my own." The stars began to shine brighter as night settled in. The ranch was peaceful, the animals safe, and both of them felt a sense of accomplishment and hope. They had faced challenges, endured hardships, and learned to work together without losing their individuality. Their bond was built on mutual respect, shared effort, and quiet understanding, an unspoken promise that they could face whatever came next together. As they rose to go inside, the woman took one last look at the fields, fences, and animals. She felt a deep sense of belonging and peace. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a home, a place of growth, and a symbol of resilience. She realized that she had not only helped repair the land, but she had also helped rebuild herself, discovering strength, patience, and the power of trust along the way. The cowboy walked beside her, carrying the last of the tools, feeling a quiet satisfaction. He knew that the ranch was stronger because of her, and more importantly that their partnership had created a space where both could thrive. They had faced challenges together, learned from them, and emerged stronger, ready to meet the future with confidence and hope. The night was calm, filled with the gentle sounds of nature. The stars reflected their quiet journey, a story of resilience, patience, trust, and growth. The woman smiled faintly, realizing that she had found more than a place to work. She had found a place to belong, a place to heal, and a place to continue building strength in herself and in the world around her. As they entered the barn to rest, both felt the weight of the day lift. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new challenges, and new opportunities to continue growing. But tonight, they could rest, knowing they had accomplished something meaningful. They had strengthened not only the ranch but also each other. proving that resilience and trust could create something lasting, meaningful, and powerful. The ranch stood quiet under the stars, a testament to hard work, shared effort, and the quiet strength that comes from understanding, patience, and mutual respect. The woman and the cowboy had built more than fences, barns, or repaired land. They had built a foundation for hope, growth, and a future together, stronger than any challenge they had faced before.